Steve Jobs. Throughout his career, Steve Jobs revolutionized the technology industry. He built Apple into a technology powerhouse, but tragically had suffered from pancreatic cancer for 10 years. On his deathbed, his last words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow."
9.
Isaac Newton. Famous scientist and mathematician Isaac Newton pushed the sciences forward great leaps and bounds. And he was not a man of few words. He said before he died, "I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, and diverting myself now and then in finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than the ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me."
8.
Michael Landon. Many knew Michael Landon as the actor from Little House on the Prairie and Bonanza. He shocked fans when he announced he had terminal pancreatic cancer. Before he died, he said, "You're right. It's time. I love you all."
7.
Whitney Houston. In her last days, famous singer and actress Whitney Houston spoke to her friends and family about Jesus. The night before she died, she told her friend, "I'm going to go see Jesus. I want to see Jesus."
6.
Leonard Nimoy. Actor and director Leonard Nimoy entertained and enlightened us for years on Star Trek. With the final tweet, he did it again. He wrote, "A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. LLAP." LLAP, of course, stands for Live Long and Prosper.
5.
Michael Jackson. The king of pop, Michael Jackson, was tragically addicted to propofol, and his doctor, Conrad Murray, continued to give it to him even when he shouldn't have. The addiction led to Jackson's eventual death, and in his last words, he said, "Milk." Milk was his term for propofol.
4.
Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin accomplished quite a lot in his life. He was one of America's founding fathers, an inventor, and author. Before he died, he said, "A dying man can do nothing easy."
3.
Ernest Hemingway. One of the most famous American authors in history, Ernest Hemingway traveled the world and found great success and failure in his publishing career. Right before he shot himself, he said to his wife, "Good night, my kitten."
2.
Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse's music career skyrocketed, but along with the success came drugs and alcohol addiction. She saw her doctor the night before her death, and Winehouse stated, "I don't want to die." She died of alcohol toxicity.
1.
Heath Ledger. Actor Heath Ledger wowed us in his performance as the Joker in the movie The Dark Knight, but behind the scenes he suffered from insomnia, complaining about not being able to go to sleep. He mixed prescription medicine with sleeping pills. Before he died, he said to his sister, Katie, look, it'll be fine, I just need to get some sleep."
The Buddha's Last Days. Sariputta, there are certain recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: as long as this good man is still young, a black-haired young man endowed with the blessing of youth in the prime of life, so long is he perfect in his lucid wisdom. But when this good man is old, aged, burdened with years, advanced in life, and come to the last stage, being 80, 90, or 100 years old, then the lucidity of his wisdom is lost. But it should not be regarded so. I am now old, aged, burdened with years, advanced in life, and come to the last stage of my years, have turned 80. Now suppose that I had 4 disciples with 100 years lifespan, perfect in mindfulness, retentiveness, memory, and lucidity of wisdom. Just as a skilled archer, trained, practiced, and tested, could easily shoot a light arrow across the shadow of a palm tree. Suppose that they were even to that extent perfect in mindfulness, retentiveness, memory, and lucidity of wisdom. Suppose that they continuously asked me about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and that I answered them when asked, and that they remembered each answer of mine, and never asked a subsidiary question, or paused except to eat, drink, consume food, taste, urinate, defecate, and rest in order to remove sleepiness and tiredness. Still, the Tathagata'S exposition of the Dhamma, his explanations of factors of the Dhamma, and his replies to questions would not yet come to an end. But meanwhile, those 4 disciples of mine, with their 100 years lifespan, would have died at the end of those 100 years. Sariputta, even if you have to carry me about on a bed, still there will be no change in the lucidity of the Tathagata'S wisdom. Rightly speaking, were it to be said of anyone, a being not subject to delusion has appeared in the world for the welfare and happiness of many. Out of compassion for the world, for the good, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans, it is of me, indeed, that rightly speaking, this should be said. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One. Having approached and paid homage, while massaging the Blessed One's limbs, he said to him, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir. It is amazing, Venerable Sir. The Blessed One's complexion is no longer pure and bright. His limbs are all flaccid and wrinkled. His body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in his faculties, in the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, the body faculty. So it is, Ananda. In youth one is subject to aging, in health one is subject to illness. While alive, one is subject to death. The complexion is no longer pure and bright. The limbs are all flaccid and wrinkled. The body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in the faculties, in the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, the body faculty. This is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Fortunate One, the teacher, further said this: Fie on you, wretched aging, aging which makes beauty fade. So much has the charming puppet been crushed beneath advancing age. One who might live 100 years also has death as destruction. Death spares none along the way. but comes crushing everything. And now again, Ananda, the Tathagata has today at Chapala's shrine consciously and deliberately rejected the rest of his allotted term of life. And when he had thus spoken, the Venerable Ananda addressed the Exalted One and said, "Vouchsafe, Lord, to remain during the eon, live on through the kalpa, O Exalted One, for the good and the happiness of the great multitudes, out of pity for the world, for the good and the gain and the weal of gods and men." "Enough now, Ananda. Beseech not the Tathagata," was the reply. "The time for making such requests is past." And again, the second time and the third time, the Venerable Ananda besought the Exalted One in the same words, and he received from the Exalted One the same reply, in that when a suggestion so evident and a hint so clear were thus given to thee by the Tathagata, thou wast yet incapable of comprehending them. If thou shouldst then have so besought the Tathagata might have rejected the appeal even to the second time, but the third time he would have granted it. Thine, therefore, O Ananda, is the fault, thine is the offense. But now, Ananda, have I not formally declared to you that it is in the very nature of all things, near and dear unto us, that we must divide ourselves from them, leave them, sever ourselves from them? How, then, Ananda, can this be possible, whereas anything whatever born, brought into being, and organized, contains within itself the inherent necessity of dissolution? How then can this be possible, that such a being should not be dissolved? No such condition can exist. All component things must grow old. Work out your salvation with diligence. The final extinction of the Tathagata will take place before long. At the end of 3 months from this time, the Tathagata will die. My age is now full ripe. My life draws to its close. I leave you. I depart, relying on myself alone. Be earnest then, O brethren, holy, full of thought. Be steadfast in resolve. Keep watch over your own hearts. Who wearies not, but holds fast to this truth and law, shall cross the sea of life, shall make an end of grief. Not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths. Bhikkhus, just a stick thrown up into the air, falls now on its bottom, now on its top. So too as beings roam and wander on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Now they go from this world to the other world. Now they come from the other world to this world. For what reason? Because they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Therefore, bhikkhus, an exertion should be made to understand. This is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the origin of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the cessation of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Bhikkhus, it is because of not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara. What for? It is, bhikkhus, because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of suffering. The noble truth of the origin of suffering. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering. The noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. That you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara. That noble truth of suffering, bhikkhus, has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the origin of suffering has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the cessation of suffering has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering has been understood and penetrated. Craving for existence has been cut off. The conduit to existence has been destroyed. Now there is no more renewed existence. The perfectly enlightened one. Bhikkhus, there are these Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is because he is fully awakened to these Four Noble Truths as they really are that the Tathagata is called the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one. Therefore, bhikkhus, an exertion should be made to understand. This is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the origin of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the cessation of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. The Four Noble Truths. Bhikkhus, there are these Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And what, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of suffering? It should be said, the five aggregates subject to clinging, that is, the form aggregate subject to clinging, the feeling aggregate subject to clinging, the perception aggregate subject to clinging, the volitional formation aggregate subject to clinging, the consciousness aggregate subject to clinging. This is called the noble truth of suffering. And what, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is this craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. This is called the noble truth of the origin of suffering. And what, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. And what, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering? It is this noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is called the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. These, bhikkhus, are the Four Noble Truths. Therefore, bhikkhus, an exertion should be made to understand. This is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the origin of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the cessation of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Seeing non-self with correct wisdom. Bhikkhus, form is impermanent. Feeling is impermanent. Perception is impermanent. Volitional formations are impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is non-self. What is non-self should be seen as it really is, with correct wisdom, thus: this is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. When one sees this thus, as it really is, with correct wisdom, one holds no more views concerning the past. When one holds no more views concerning the past, one holds no more views concerning the future. When one holds no more views concerning the future, one has no more obstinate grasping. When one has no more obstinate grasping, the mind becomes dispassionate towards form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, and is liberated from the taints by non-clinging. By being liberated, it is steady. By being steady, it is content. By being content, one is not agitated. Being unagitated, one personally attains nibbana. One understands. Destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What has to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. In this fathom-long body. I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. Yet I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of suffering. It is in this fathom-long body, endowed with perception and mind, that I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. This body is old Kama. Bhikkhus, this body is not yours, nor does it belong to others. It is old Kama, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. Therein, bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple attends carefully and closely to dependent origination itself. Thus, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. That is, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the six sense bases. With the six sense bases as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formation. With the cessation of volitional formation, cessation of consciousness. With cessation of consciousness comes cessation of name and form. With cessation of name and form comes the cessation of the six sense bases. With the cessation of the six sense bases comes cessation of contact. With cessation of contact comes cessation of feeling. With cessation of feeling comes cessation of craving. With cessation of craving comes cessation of clinging. With cessation of clinging comes cessation of existence. With cessation of existence comes cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth comes cessation of aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. A strong post or pillar is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. And how, bhikkhus, is there restraint? Here, having seen a form with the eye, having heard a sound with the ear, having smelt an odor with the nose, having savored a taste with the tongue, having felt a tactile object with the body, having cognized a mental phenomenon with the mind. A bhikkhu is not intent upon a pleasing form and not repelled by a displeasing form. He dwells, having set up mindfulness of the body, with a measureless mind, and he understands as it really is that liberation of mind. Liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil unwholesome states cease without remainder. It is in such a way that there is restraint. Suppose, bhikkhus, a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds, and tie them by a strong rope. He would catch a snake, crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Having done so, he would bind them to a strong post or pillar. Then those 6 animals, with different domains and different feeding grounds, would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, "Let me enter an anthill, as above." The monkey would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a forest." Now when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would stand close to that post or pillar. They would sit down there. They would lie down there. So too, bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu has developed and cultivated mindfulness direct to the body, the eye does not pull in the direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. The ear does not pull in the direction of agreeable sounds, nor are disagreeable sounds repulsive. The nose does not pull in the direction of agreeable odors, nor are disagreeable odors repulsive. The tongue does not pull in the direction of agreeable tastes, nor are disagreeable tastes repulsive. The body does not pull in the direction of agreeable tactile objects, nor are disagreeable tactile objects repulsive. The mind does not pull in the direction of agreeable mental phenomena, nor are disagreeable mental phenomena repulsive. It is in such a way that there is restraint. A strong post or pillar. This, bhikkhus, is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, bhikkhus, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body. Make it our vehicle. Make it our basis. Stabilize it. Exercise ourselves in it, and fully perfect it. Thus should you train yourselves. Before Tathagata enlightenment, generally dwelt in concentration by mindfulness of breathing dwelling. Bhikkhus. That bhikkhu gains at will, without trouble or difficulty. That concentration through the development and cultivation of which no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. And what concentration is it through the development and cultivation of which no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. It is, bhikkhus, when concentration by mindfulness of breathing has been developed and cultivated, that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. And how, bhikkhus, is concentration by mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down. Having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and set up mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows, I breathe out short. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe out. He trains thus, tranquilizing the bodily formations, I will breathe in. He trains thus, tranquilizing the bodily formations, I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing rapture, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing rapture, I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing happiness, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing happiness, I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mental formation, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mental formation, I will breathe out. He trains thus, tranquilizing the mental formation, I will breathe in. He trains thus, tranquilizing the mental formation, I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, gladdening the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, gladdening the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, concentrating the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, concentrating the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, liberating the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, Liberating the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus. Contemplating impermanence, I will breathe in. He trains thus. Contemplating impermanence, I will breathe out. He trains thus. Contemplating fading away, I will breathe in. He trains thus. Contemplating fading away, I will breathe out. He trains thus. Contemplating cessation, I will breathe in. He trains thus. Contemplating cessation, I will breathe out. He trains thus. Contemplating relinquishment, I will breathe in. He trains thus. Contemplating relinquishment, I will breathe out. It is, bhikkhus, when concentration by mindfulness of breathing has been developed and cultivated in this way that no shaking or trembling occurs in the body, and no shaking or trembling occurs in the mind. I too, bhikkhus, before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened, generally dwelt in this dwelling. While I generally dwelt in this dwelling, neither my body nor my eyes became fatigued, and my mind, by not clinging, was liberated from the taints. Therefore, bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu wishes, may neither my body nor my eyes become fatigued, and may my mind, by not clinging, be liberated from the taints. This same concentration by mindfulness of breathing should be closely attended to.